Hi, I'm Stephen. This is Mick, and today we're going to be talking about school. Before we begin, though, we just want to say that this is only a discussion. There are no right or wrong answers. These are just our thoughts and opinions, which can and will change. Neither of us are experts on anything. We are just two dudes talking. So, Mick, I want to start this conversation off by talking about what is the scope? We're talking about school, but school can go from kindergarten, primary, high school, secondary, university, TAFE, all of them. So I want to kind of limit the scope of the discussion a little bit. And you can tell me your feelings on this, but I want to limit it to, the I'm calling it compulsory, but I don't really like saying that you have to do it. But the portion of schooling that we recommend everyone should do. So every human being should go through this schooling. So if we think about it in the current system, that's kind of like primary school, you kind of expect everyone to go through that. High school, to a certain extent, maybe the first couple of years, but then after that, you kind of break off and do other things. So we're just focusing on the parts of schooling where, we expect everyone to go through it. Although it's not necessarily like people can opt out if they want, because I don't want to control anyone and tell them they have to go to school. So you're happy if we kind of keep that the scope and focus of this conversation?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. Really, what we're focusing on is the development of young kids, really. So kids coming through, and probably part of that is going through a portion of their teenage years as early adolescent.
Yeah, and it may even be that in talking about it, we realize that the age bracket maybe should shift. Maybe the part of schooling that everyone goes through doesn't necessarily have to be when they're young. Maybe that's further on. Maybe when they're young, they're doing other stuff. Like, who knows? That might just be part of the conversation. But what I want to focus on is, at the end, at the end of this, everyone should have gone through the part of schooling that we're talking about, regardless of what age that occurs.
Yep.
Happy with that? Okay. So there's kind of an implicit here that we think school should change when we're talking about school, and we could focus on what does school do, what does school do now, but I'm sure between the two of us we both think there are parts of school that we think should change. So in order, or before we change anything, regardless of what we're doing, we should kind of look at what is the current state of things. So let's talk about, first off, what is the current objective or purpose of school as we see it. Now, I should say here, both of us, it's been a long time since we've been in school. And like we said, we're focusing mainly on primary and secondary here, roughly. So it's been a while since, I don't know, both of us have been there, about 10 years for me. I don't even want to ask you. I'm not going to make you say that. But yeah, it's been a while, so we may be a little bit off when just inferring from experience. But Mick, what do you feel that the current objective or purpose of school is?
Yeah, it's a good question. So to give some context, I guess I finished up primary school in the early 90s and finished up high school in the late 90s, I guess. So it's probably been a good 20 years since I've actually been to school. But I think back then, and probably hasn't changed much now, I think the idea is to make you a productive member of society. And I think the heavy focus of that is for you to get some kind of job at the end of your formal education, wherever that ends up being. So whether you go up to, I think you have to go to year 12 now for an apprenticeship or a traineeship. So whether you finish there and go into apprenticeship or traineeship, or you continue through to university and then go into some kind of what they would qualify as a professional job. But I think it's the focus for me had always been on what kind of job you're going to get after being educated, I guess.
So when you went to school, you felt that, this is preparing me to get a job afterwards.
Yeah, I remember as early. I think it started in early high school. The idea of jobs, and I remember them sort of educating us about different careers. Funny enough, back then I wanted to be a pilot, a pilot in the Air Force kind of thing. So that had totally changed. But I do remember from an early age going in high school the focus was on thinking about where you're going to be as an adult, what profession you're going to have, and then the way in which school shaped or they shape school to teach you into that profession, I guess. The further you get through, you start to sort of narrow the fields down in order to sort of get those considered to be qualifications for those type of jobs, I guess.
I think my perspective is a little bit more cynical. Like I do like that. And that was always kind of the thought. I mean, you'd have those days where you'd go and talk to someone, okay, what do you want to do in life? How can we get you to that? But like I said, this is kind of talking about, okay, the portion of school where everyone should have gone through. And to me, there's that part of schooling that everyone is going through is to ensure that we all have a kind of certain level of understanding of things, like language, for example, that every person in society can speak the predominant language of that society. Mathematics, so that everyone can add, subtract, multiply, divide. Like the purpose of school, from my perspective, is just that idea that, okay, by the end of this, everyone's gone through it. Everyone will have some minimum level of knowledge / understanding, whatever, however you want to call it. And then, yeah, we can fit them into society knowing that they've got that.
Yeah, I guess that's true. I mean, it's probably a little bit similar, but I'm looking at what the end result is. But you're right. Schools to try and get everyone to a certain level of understanding that can have some kind of level of consensus between everyone. So, like you said, everyone has some level of knowledge about maths, of being able to add and subtract, or understanding how to spell words and put them together to construct sentences or paragraphs and all the rest of it. So, yeah, I think at that point it's to get everyone on the same level of certain aspects of knowledge, I guess.
I've got here standardizing humans.
So why do you see that as cynical? Yeah, I was going to ask. So why do you see that as being a cynical outcome?
I guess it depends on your perspective of it, because to me it feels controlling. Like it's actually, it could be a good thing or a bad thing. It doesn't really, there is no direction to it. It's just that, yeah, we're trying to ensure that there's some similarity between all the people who have gone through it, which is a perfectly fine thing to do. I mean, I'm going to recommend that when I say what I think the purpose of school should be. But yeah, I don't know. Yours just seems a bit more optimistic. It's like, oh, we're leading you to some further thing, where it's like, we're just getting you to a point, and then from that, you're moving on. I don't know. Just that's the way it feels to me. I can't really.
No, that's fair enough. Yeah,
put it into words. The other thing I think school does is that it helps us order, and like order the students based off of this. Maybe it's up to you what you think whether you think it's important or not, but certain criteria, like you'll do mathematics and you'll rank students based on how well they can do maths or language or whatever it is. So certain cognitive abilities, usually we rank human beings or students on.
Yeah, so maybe that is true. So basically, a school is a way of actually sort of ranking people so that when they actually become an adult, I guess they sit appropriately in some kind of hierarchy. I guess you could see it from that light somewhat, yeah.
Like when you do tests at school, they always give you the score, out of 100, how many you got right. And it felt like, if you did worse, or if you got like a 60 out of 100 or whatever, you might be made fun of. But the test itself is just, okay, we're trying to find out where the average of people are and then order them. You could make a test in such a way that the spread is more closer, and so people might not feel as demeaned by the score, by having a lower score. It's just showing you, okay, this is an ordering, but it doesn't necessarily say too much about you or your capabilities. I don't know. It's just that was always a weird feeling that I had when doing tests in school. It's like it suggests that these people are lesser in some way, but that's not necessarily true. You're just ranking them on this very specific thing. Now, it's easy for me to say that because I generally did pretty good at those tests, but still I felt that this feels wrong to say that, because someone got a higher score on this test, they're a better human being or they're better at something. It's like, no, it's very narrow what you're actually measuring.
Yeah, it's funny. Tests are a funny thing. I don't know if they're very good. I think they're an easy way to assume what someone's learned, but it's not necessarily the case. Like, say, I think at times I've often struggled with certain tests because I don't actually understand the question. So the question to me is so open that it's like I want to ask them more questions from that to figure out exactly why or what they're doing. And so that had always struggled me a little bit. And sometimes I completely misunderstood what they're after. And so you go down a different tangent. So that's like a clear case of like you said, I could have actually scored low, but actually if they gave me something practically to do, I could have showed them how to do it, even if it was about the same level of knowledge. But I really didn't understand what they were actually that individual was looking for when they were evaluating me. So yeah, I guess whenever you do an evaluation of people, you can't remove that some level of subjectivity by the person or the system evaluating you. So it's taking it from a particular perspective, I guess.
No, that's a really good point. That being good on a test doesn't prove anything except that you're good on a test. Like there are a lot of circumstances where you might be great on a test. You may understand how an engine works in a car, right? And you can write it all out on a piece of paper. But then you go to actually repair a car and you don't know the first thing about where to start and what's going on, how to, solve the problem.
Yeah, well, I think I got better at tests because I realised two things. The first one is that they just want me to regurgitate the information that they wanted me to learn. And then the second one was that once I realised I needed to understand the evaluator's perspective, so whether that be the teacher or whatever, it made it a lot easier for me to then do the test because I understand. So some classes will actually sort of run you through drills of doing doing practice tests, and I can actually, to be honest with you, you can go through a whole unit or a whole topic, I guess, a subject, and then and it almost feels that sometimes you can actually just rock up for that last week and be able to figure out what it is they're actually after you to put on the test, and then basically you just go there and regurgitate that. So to me, it was like learning how to actually regurgitate information to someone else. It wasn't actually, it didn't actually feel like it was measuring what I actually, I guess it's trying to, but it didn't because I took a different way of filling the test out. Yeah, it's a really strange one, a way people measure you through tests.
Yeah, you took a different approach. Like they're expecting that throughout the semester you've learnt this stuff and you're just going and feeling it out. But actually what you did is the last week you just learnt it. I mean, I completely agree with you. That's the main thing that tests taught me, or exams or whatever it is that how to learn some knowledge in a very short period of time, remember it and hold on to that for, a day or two and then just completely forget it. Like most of my assessments throughout school was that it's like the last 2 days before a test. Okay, read over those practice exams, like you said, those practice assessments, like you said, and then just remember those and then just regurgitate it back and then just completely forget about it, which is pretty much a waste of time, really, now that I think back on it.
Yeah, it's a funny kind of system. And I guess, it didn't really, I guess it took me a while to understand. Like at the beginning, you're sort of trying to, I remember doing a physics course when I was first doing physics in uni, actually. And it was like the first unit I kind of did. And I wrote down all the notes and I spent a lot of time actually trying to learn that unit. And it was one of my lower scores, actually. And I think what I did is because I fed myself so much information when it came to the test, it was hard for me to pull on the very specific factors that the actual test wanted. So what I realised in the future is I could actually reduce my workload by just understanding sort of reverse engineering. So look at what is it that they want, then figure out just those elements, forget everything else, and then focus on that in order to nail the test. So, yeah.
It's very counterintuitive. And like I agree with you. There were definite subjects where I wanted to learn the material, but I knew the tests were like focusing on specific things. So I had to just concentrate on those specific things, even though, they may not actually be that important in the future. And you want to actually get a good grasp of the whole unit, the whole syllabus. But yeah, it's kind of the way it's set up is so that you focus on these specific things for a short period of time, regurgitate that, and then move on. Okay, we sort of covered what we think the current objective or purpose of school is. You were saying before we started that we should look at the difference in society or the world from like when schooling was first introduced to now, and how much schooling has changed, or the lack of change, relative to the change in society. Do you want to maybe talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so just from my perspective, I mean, I'm no historian, but I kind of feel that school was originally, I mean, if you think back maybe a couple of centuries ago, how school sort of first started, or wherever it first started, I guess originally it was about, it was almost probably a prestige thing. So everyone probably didn't get to go to school, and those people that went to school were those that acquired high level knowledge and certain elements. I think it was about transferring knowledge, I guess, is probably where its main purpose was. But then access to knowledge was always difficult. So you can imagine, going to try and find, something in history, you'd have to actually go to the library, find the book, read the book, or maybe read a few books in order to gain the knowledge. And actually physically doing that task took time, and it took access. So maybe not everyone had access to libraries or written records of knowledge and all the rest of it. And as times change, we've all become, today I've got all that knowledge in my pocket on a phone. And so I think back then I guess the evaluation of knowledge was at a much greater level, because there was more effort in actually getting the knowledge out. So if you had to get the knowledge out, you'd have to, write a book. You'd probably get it, the publisher to audit it, or not audit it, to review it and things like this. So I think there was more scrutiny about the information that actually came out. But today, everyone can place some form of information online, whether that be a photo of an event or something tangible like that, or whether it's, trying to discern information through other people's written work and all the rest of it. So I think now that there's a significant improvement in our access to knowledge, we're walking away from one person sort of teaching them a set of knowledge, and then that gets them through their professional career, through life, or whatever their value is in life, to now that you just need to keep learning almost. So what I do today in work will definitely change in the next 5 or 10 years. And so it's incumbent on me to try and keep up to date. I don't think that was as prevalent in the past. So I think discerning information, it's almost like school needs to be at a high level. It's not actually transferring the knowledge, it's teaching you how to assess knowledge and being able to validate it and discern information and all the rest of it. So I think that because our access to information has changed, the environment's changed so much that it makes the sort of like the traditional model of school a little bit obsolete.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think that is a big part of what schooling originally was, is that it was difficult to access that knowledge. I mean, we've talked about in the past, you'd have, what do you call them, encyclopedias, like books filled with stuff, and they'd barely cover anything if you compare it to like Wikipedia on the internet today. And that's just like a single source of a repository of knowledge. Now you've got access to a whole lot more. So I think, yeah, that's a really good point. And I agree with you there that part of getting through school is less about transferring knowledge to people. It's more about teaching people to access knowledge, to discern knowledge. That's one of the big problems I feel like we've got today, is that it's so easy to get access to information, to knowledge, that you don't, and there is very little validation depending on where you go for that. And even in the places where there is a lot of validation, there's also biases and other things that go on that corrupt it. For example, like the research papers, you'd think that would be a really high, or what would you call it, high quality, high consensus type stuff, that it would be good knowledge, like you could rely on it. But there's also a lot of games that go on there, and a lot of manipulation based on incentive structures within universities and that. So yeah, discerning information, discerning knowledge is a big part of, I think, what should be taught in school.
Yeah, definitely agree. I think it's, I think looking around the world today, it's very easy to manipulate people, and learning those forms of manipulation and understanding how to kind of discern or protect yourself from that kind of having certain processes in place to alleviate that risk of you acquiring knowledge, bad knowledge, or manipulate, I guess, some form of manipulated knowledge and things like that is definitely important to navigate in the world today, because you know, I think there is a bit of an issue with. It's almost like, I mean, this is overly said, but it is like an information wars. It is like whoever can actually control the narrative has control, has some level of power over people. And so understanding how people control narratives is very important to discern what information is important to you and what is actually trying to manipulate you or to take you in the wrong direction, I guess.
Yeah, and I mean, there's many ways that, like, we use the term manipulation, that people are manipulating one another, and it suggests that we are possibly foolish, that we can be manipulated, but it's not necessarily that. It is that we have these biological, psychological things that we can't really overcome. Like, we can't take in the amount of knowledge that is coming at us. But the other point, and the one that I'm more want to highlight, is that we can be manipulated because generally I think people see the best in others. So their first assumption isn't someone is trying to manipulate me. Their first assumption is, oh, this person's, trying to help me out. So I think that in itself leaves us open to that manipulation, to being taken control of. But I wouldn't want to get rid of that, because I think that's a great part about being human, is that we, have that trust of others, that we want to believe in the best of people. So yeah, I just wanted to put that out there.
I agree, and I probably say manipulation. I don't. I'll try and remove partially the negative connotation around it, because there can be manipulation which is purposely done on purpose, and then there's manipulation which isn't actually done on purpose. It's almost like a form of Chinese whispers, where the individual picks up information. It's the first time they've heard information. It seems to make sense to them. It's really revolutionary to them if that information is true. And so there's an emotional excitement to that. They want to tell others, they share that knowledge. And what they haven't realized is maybe they haven't validated it properly. They haven't gone through the rigorous process. And as they share it with someone else, that person can go through the same process as the initial person of like, oh, well, that's crazy. And then they tell, 8 other friends. So that, people doing that, I don't think do it on purpose, but it's just that they don't do maybe they don't know, or they don't do the work of doing rigorous checks of the knowledge in which they're gaining before they, set their hearts on it, or maybe tell other people with a great level of certainty and things like that.
And just in case anyone listening is, I just want to clear it up, because you called it Chinese whispers. What, in case that offends someone? Sorry. What you mean is like the game of telephone, where it's like you spread information to someone, and by the time it gets to the nth person, like the disparity between what was originally said and what they heard is just like astronomical. Like, you can't even go off of that information anymore because it's completely wrong.
Yeah. So thank you for correcting me. You can tell my age from what some of the terms I use. So yeah, I don't even know why it's called Chinese whispers, to be honest. But yeah, there was no intent, but rather a label to use, to be able to describe something, a process, I guess.
Yeah. No, I understand that. It's just, you want to clear it up. Some people can't see past the language that we use to actual intent. So want to make that as clear as possible when we can. All right. So let's address directly now, what do we think the objective / purpose of school should be? So my thought process for this, before I get to what my opinions actually are, was to think, okay, well, everyone's got to go through this. So everyone's going to have the same experience. Well, then what is it that every human being wants? And then what does every human being have in common? Because we're all going through this. We want to make it as applicable to each individual as possible. So I think they're the first things to consider for me. My answers to these were, what is it that every human being wants? I think it's just to get the most out of life, or to realize their full potential. And it sounds a bit hokey, and I know we've done it in other topics that, realizing your full potential is kind of the objective of life. But I do think that it is. And when you understand what that means, it's less hokey, less ethereal, and more practical than we may give it credit for. And then the other thing, what does every human being have in common? We, meaning us as individuals, are at the root of everything we do. So what I mean by that is, throughout life, no matter what we do, we are going to be there, because, it's all from our perspective. It's all we're there to experience it. So that should be taken into account when we're thinking about, okay, what should we be doing as part of school? Now, before I get to my opinions, do you want to say anything?
I think that's quite good. So I think like the first part, that self-realization, you're reaching your full potential. I think the reason why we try to strive to that is that each of us, I guess, as humans, want to see our purpose in life, and it's usually through some sort of social contribution to our peers or group or tribe or however you want to describe it. So, that I think is definitely what people strive towards, is what am I good at? What can I actually bring to the world and help people with? And I think that's sort of like that second part, to realize that you are part of the world and you can contribute something. And so what is it that you can contribute? And so if you can focus on that internally, then you're probably going to get the best out of yourself. And when you get the best out of yourself, I think society gets the best out of you. So
I think and the reason I say that the purpose of life is to realize your full potential is because I think that is when you have a feeling that's, oh, this is a good feeling that I want more of, it's because you've reached your potential. That is what's giving you that feeling. I mean, this is just from my perspective and thinking about it and what it actually means. Like, what does it mean when you feel good about something? Why is it that you feel good about it? And not necessarily just in the moment, that you feel good about it over time, because you might do something now that you feel good about, but in a week's time you feel bad about it. Like you managed to manipulate again or control someone to get them to do something which you feel good about now because it gives you some kind of physical elation. But then in a week's time you think, oh, I didn't feel good about that. I feel bad about that. So it's because you've what do they call, what's the word? You cut off your nose to spite your face, something like that. I can't remember the exact saying, but it's like you haven't seen the forest for the trees. You've just, been very short-sighted and haven't realized the consequences of those actions there. But in time, you will realize the consequences. So I think when we get those feelings that tell us this is good, I want more of this feeling, it's because we've reached our potential. That's very general, that's very abstract, but I think that's a good starting point.
Yeah, I agree. I guess like through life, you're trying to, it's really hard because you're being pulled and pushed in all different directions. You're trying to balance what you want out of life as opposed to what other people want out of life. And I guess, just focusing on, like you said, that time in which there's some kind of intuition that says to you that this is there's something in this that's what I want. And I guess if you get that feeling, you want to try and narrow down or focus on that feeling, because that's really your authentic self as well. There's this intuitive drive, and we don't know why. So like a musician might have an intuitive drive, or a sports star might have an intuitive drive. For me, I have an intuitive drive to solve problems. I can't tell you why that's the case. I was just born that way. Ever since a kid, I'd try and fix things or, make things or whatever. So I think when you find that feeling, it's to recognize that is part of your authentic self, and to try and keep that in the barrage of the world around you is probably a really important thing to try and do.
Yeah, very well put. I think once you find that thing that gives you that feeling of, oh, I want more of this, I want to do this better, that's what you should stick with, and you should give it your all. One of the things is that when you don't give it your all, when you just half-ass something, that's when we usually feel lousy about it. It's like, doesn't matter what it is or what you're doing, if you give it your all, you'll feel better about it. And then the perfect scenario for me is that you find something that interests you and you give it your all, and then you get the greatest feeling. Like, you can find and be doing something that you're totally disinterested in, but if you're giving it your all, you still get a feeling of satisfaction from it. But if you find something that you're interested in, that you're giving it your all, that's, like, to me, how you get the best feelings out of life.
Yeah, you're right. I wonder if it's like there's a level of efficiency between what it is that you're actually really desire, as opposed to something that you just have to do. So I would imagine that, when you feel that level of desire and that intrigue and curiosity about that field or whatever it is that you're doing, that's probably where you're most efficient with your energy. You're most motivated, so you're going to get the greatest level of output. And so that's the kind of mindset which is going to make you very valuable. But if you're, like you said, if you're doing something that you're not very interested in, there is the there's the lack of motivation, which decreases the level of energies, which impacts the outputs. And it might not be obvious, but yeah, you might be less productive than you could be.
A little bit of a tangent. To me, I see motivation as a reduction in effort. So if you're motivated to do something, it takes less effort out of you to actually do it. Whereas if you're unmotivated to do something, you can still do it. It's just going to take you more effort. So that's why, like you said, if you can find that thing where the motivation is inherent or is natural, you don't have to think about it. Like I use the example of eating. Like no one has to tell you to eat. You just feel hungry. You're motivated to do it. And so it takes little effort to actually go and find food. But it takes a little bit more effort, say, if you're working in a cluttered environment, to say, what is the benefit of me getting up, cleaning up this environment, and then getting back to work? You have to actually find the motivation in there. Oh, because if I clean up everything, it's going to make it, less of a impact on my mental processing, and I'll be able to concentrate more on what I'm doing. Like there's various other things that are a benefit for it, but you have to do the work to figure out the motivation there. It's not necessarily as apparent.
Actually, yeah. When you said it, it makes more sense to say that, yes, it takes less effort rather than you gaining more energy from motivation. So, yes, I would say that if there's something that's is not your authentic self, there's a certain level more effort that needs to overcome in the thought process that you might put through, or the physical process that you might put through, that you otherwise might not when you're motivated by that task or whatever it is that you're doing. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I tend to see that the effort, or willpower, I call it when I'm talking about effort, you have a limited supply. So you can max that out, and then you just have to reduce the cost of performing actions through various means. But I've written a piece on that if anyone wants to further information about it. Getting back to a bit more tangibly, what do we think the actual objective/purpose of school is? For myself, the first thing I want to say is that I think the purpose of school should be to develop the skills that help us get the most out of life. So to help realize our full potential. Anything to say to that point?
Yeah, I would agree. And I guess part of that is that you're, for me, that it's the level of you get to a point in which you become, almost completely independent, so that you're able to do the things in life without necessarily having the support of others. And doing that, I guess, confidently. Yeah.
My next one is to be prepared for the future, keeping in mind that the future is unknown. So this should really be preparing us to handle anything. And I think this comes back to we are at the root of everything we do, which leads to my next point and this is what the main focus I think should be on school, at least the part that we recommend every human being should go through, is that we learn to master ourselves. We learn, about our bodies. We learn about our emotions. We learn about ourselves as much as possible so that we can be the best, do the most, be the most efficient at anything that we do in life, so that we are most prepared. Because like I said, no matter what we do in life, we are going to be there. We may not be the center of the universe, but we are all the center of our own lives. So you might want to make that center as strong as possible.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Yeah, it's about basically getting, I think that really everything you said there kind of aligns to, I think it is that level of independence and the confidence to use that independence. So, I mean, you could actually be independent, but not have the confidence to go and be independent, or vice versa. You could be really confident, but you might not have the skills to be independent. So I think those two really, they are the key factors to get you to sort of self-realization, I guess, or the tools.
So you're saying that in your mind, you see that mastery of self as equivalent to being independent. That's when you stop relying on other people and you can fully rely on yourselves.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, and that you've got the confidence to do that too. So so that you can go out and approach the world, and if you fail, you're not going to be a mess. You're able to pull yourself up and review and take stock and figure out ways to do it without actually having to. I mean, it's always good to have the support around you, but you should be able to go through that process yourself at some level, and then obviously you can get the support of others. But it really starts with you, like you said.
Yeah. Okay. I've got a couple of additional things, and then maybe I'll let you say if you've got any opinion about what the objective or purpose of school should be. A couple of additional things that this is just like stretch goals. I mean, to me, once we focus on mastering ourselves, once we've got that down, it's like, okay, here are a couple of additional things that I think would be beneficial to all of us, but we don't necessarily have to cover them as part of that, again, compulsory part of school or that recommended part of schooling. The first one I've got is discovering our aptitude. So this kind of goes back to what are you good at? What do you enjoy doing? As I think that should be an additional part of schooling. And then on top of that, discovering what it is we desire or what it is we want. So we may be good at something, but we may not actually really want to do that. Like you may be natural at playing tennis, but actually you want to play soccer. So I think knowing both of those is good. Knowing what we're good at is beneficial because then we can always fall back on that if we have to. But then also knowing what we want and chasing after that, I think is beneficial because that will probably give us that motivation and make things a bit more effortless. So what do you think about those?
Yeah, I think that's I think it is really important to understand the difference between what you're good at and what you're motivated by because I guess there's a lot of people through life that actually get brought up and they might be really good at something and everyone around them encourages them to do it. And so then they feel the need to actually follow through on that. Even though it's not their natural desire or it's really not their authentic self. But people, I think that's important to understand the difference between the two so that people that are actually naturally good at something they're not motivated by, I guess, don't get stuck with sort of following what others perceive their value is, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, there is definitely a level of satisfaction that we get by doing stuff that we are good at. But it's always like you said, it's just not being pigeonholed into that. Just because you are good at doing something doesn't mean you can't go off and do something else. And there's more than enough human beings on the planet that we can cover all our bases in terms of keeping everyone alive. Like you don't have to, you're good at farming, so you're going to have to go and be a farmer. It's like, no, we've got a little bit of leeway there. You can go and do something else. At least, I mean, if that's the goal of society, which we can probably talk about another time. But so in terms of objective purpose of school, do you have anything else you want to add? Are you happy with those points?
Yeah, I think that makes complete sense to me is to get the person to, I guess at the moment what we're saying is like try and get them as to their authentic self and try and make them as independent as possible and probably after some level of ability to regulate their confidence too. So
all right, I think the natural progression here is to talk about, well, if we're aiming for mastery of self, we're aiming for independence, if we're aiming for authentic being, what makes that up? Do you feel that that's a good direction to go in?
Yeah,
as part of the conversation.
Yeah, I think so. And thinking, so are you talking about what are the, I guess, what is it that would happen at school in order for you to try and achieve this?
Yeah. So what is it we're trying to teach the students? So a bit more tangible, and I'll give you some examples. But once again, I just want to go over why I think it's important to learn to be independent, to learn how to master ourselves. Once again, that we are at the root of everything we do in life. So you want to make sure that foundation is as strong as possible. So I'm bad at examples, but hopefully this one will help a little bit. For example, if you are playing tennis and you improve your serve, right? That skill in itself doesn't really transfer to much else in life. But if you improve your ability to focus on what you're doing, that will help you with everything you do in life, including being able to serve a tennis ball, because you'll be able to better focus. So it's like you can concentrate on those specific things that you want to do, but that's later on. First off, I think we should concentrate on the skills that help us improve ourselves, that help us level up.
I'd completely agree with that. I almost think that primary school should be set on some fundamental ways about how you should go about getting the best out of yourself when you live. So not looking at all the individual details. So maybe you still do a little bit of sort of work around learning how to spell and English and maths and all the rest of it. But I would reduce that a lot. I think you're right. a lot of it's about how do you actually have some. I guess I don't know if it all falls under this umbrella, but it's like learning your self-control. It's like learning how to. It's actually almost like learning how to operate yourself. So like there's certain things that you need, or there's certain things that are going to put you in a much better position in order for you to get the best outcomes. So it's learning, okay, what does me as a person, me as a human, what is it that I actually need as a human? And what are the range of states that I'm going to go through, and how do I get the best out of myself, knowing that having that knowledge, like, knowing that I've got to get good health, so good food into my body, or doing good exercise. I guess these are all important in order to get the best out of yourself to begin with. And I think that sets you up to put yourself in the best position to be able to learn things. So I guess, to get into a state of learning, there's a lot of things the conditions which you needed to meet in order to get the best out of that state. So I guess when you put kids in a classroom, you're all trying to learn something, but I guess each student could be at a very different level of state. And I think by understanding how to control that state and getting the best out of yourself will put you in the best position to learn. So it's almost like, learning how to operate yourself at an earlier age.
100%, and well put. That's kind of what I mean when I say that the objective should be to mastery of self, is to understand, okay, what needs should I take care of in order for me to be like put my energy in whatever it is I desire? Because we have those physiological needs that will always be vying for our attention. And if we aren't meeting them, if we aren't fulfilling them satisfactorily, they'll always be pulling us away from what it is we want to be doing. So what is it in terms of like diet, exercise, intellectual stimulation, even spiritual stimulation, like all this stuff? How much of it do we need? What is best for us? And let's take care of that first. And then at that point, it's like, okay, we're all good. We're 100%. Now we get to choose what we do next. We get to choose where we put the rest of our focus and attention.
Yeah, I think so. And I think also like, the way in which so I guess when you go to school to learn something, and I don't think the whole period of time is, you've obviously got breaks throughout that in order for you to not always be learning. But part of that is to actually get into the learning state, take advantage of that learning state, and then sort of decompress or debrief from that learning state. And learning the actions before and after the learning state is probably quite valuable in order to, okay, how do I get my body to the point at which I can sit down and now really focus on this thing and get the best out of it? And then what's my limitation before I have to then, debrief and do some other things that actually help the brain absorb that information as well. And I think that often forgotten. I don't know what schools are like now, but from memory, it's sort of like you have the assembly, you've got 2 hours of learning, you go out for, 15 or half an hour, you got another 2 hours of learning, you go out for lunch, you got another 2 hours of learning. Now, obviously the breaks, I think there is some realization from that pattern that you need breaks in between learning. But when they're going out and doing those breaks, what is each student doing? So is one student just sitting down and another student's going out and expending their energy in physical sport or, whatever? And then those different elements might bring different states back into the classroom. So taking advantage of those breaks, maybe, you do have the breaks, but then the 2 hours in the morning aren't really spent learning. They're spent, going through exercise regimes or breathing or, certain other tasks, I guess.
Yeah, I was going to say something and I lost it. So that's why there was that pause there. But I completely agree with you. I really wonder what, if any, consideration was made when putting together the structure for school. Like you said, 2 hours, 15 minutes, 2 hours, hour, whatever it is. Was there any consideration taken to how our mind works? Like, for example, I know that the earlier parts of your day, I say earlier, but what I mean is after waking up. So like if your schedule's all screwed up, then this may occur at a different time of the day. But for generally, if you're following like the sun, you'll sleep at night, you wake up in the morning, then those early few hours of the day, you will have more ability to focus and concentrate on things. So that's when you want to be doing more like logical, rigid stuff. And then after that, you slowly throughout the day lose the ability to focus, or it becomes harder and more difficult to focus. So that's when it's better to do more creative stuff. So it's like, first of all, were those time periods, the 2 hours, 15 minutes, taking that into consideration? Second of all, are the subjects you're doing in those time periods taking that into consideration? Like later in the day, you should be doing more creative stuff like drama or music, whereas earlier in the day, you'd probably be better at mathematics, possibly language. I'm not sure where that would fit exactly. But yeah, how much of that was actually taken into consideration?
Yeah, and how often do we actually go and review that too? So like, that might have been taken consideration in the 1960s or 70s. I don't know, when I'm just sort of randomly pulling a number, but I guess, it's not set and forget. It's like, you've got to continually to iterate. So what we learn about people has got to be then thought about how that schedule runs. And so I would say that we definitely know, particularly in the last, I guess it's always from my perspective of living, but it feels like the last 20 years we've gained a lot of knowledge about mental health. And I think having that applied to school and not for when you just get sick, I guess, would be of great value. That's not to say that I don't think it tries to be a tent, but probably the systems are very slow for change. But the world and the environment around us is changing at a rapid rate. So I guess the system's not keeping up with the evolution of us as humans, I guess.
Yeah, I think so. The system, the environment, just our understanding about our knowledge, our understanding of neuroscience and how we think and how we learn, like, has that been factored into how we do schooling? Doubtful from my perspective. One thing I want to come back to, you said it may be beneficial to do like language and math as part of, teaching someone how to get the most out of themselves, to master themselves, to become independent. To me, I go to the point of most likely that will be a part of it, but I think it's a consequence of aiming for that mastery of self. I think that when we look at, okay, we want people to be the best version, we want people to understand themselves, be able to work at the most effectiveness. I think language, mathematics, some other things will just naturally come from that endeavor.
Yeah, I kind of think that you can. I think we talked about this in the past. I think you sort of couple them together, and I kind of wonder. I had been thinking about this recently. Wonder they kind of fit under a category of communication. So like, you would never have thought, like, if someone in high school told me that mathematics is communication, I would have laughed at them because I didn't really have that perspective. But the reality is that's actually what it is. It's a form of us to communicate in a particular language in order to get physical outcomes in the world around us. And I guess if it's taught from that perspective, then you see the value. So why is it I'm learning maths? Well, I'm learning maths in order to communicate a solution to you. Why is it I'm learning English? I'm learning English to maybe communicate my feelings to you, or I'll write a song or whatever, or maybe it's to do a report. So thinking about, those traditional subjects about how, even art, like when you draw art, that's a form of communication. So maybe, those traditional subjects sort of fit under this umbrella that the reason why you're creating this is not only for you to be able to explore your own thoughts, but generally these are how we actually communicate to each other about certain, the value that other people bring. So I think if you set it from that context and you did those other change the other aspects of the curriculum, you'd probably get a bit more greater understanding about why people are doing that. And there's probably greater level of purpose to then go on ahead and learn that, I guess, too. So
Yeah, completely agree. I mean, talking a bit more tangible about, okay, what should we teach students then for them to be able to get the most out of life, to get the most out of themselves? I think one of the big things is interpreting our feelings. Like, I love that you put it like pretty much everything is just communication, language, math, art. It's just all a way for us to communicate what we feel inside. And I think it starts with, okay, first you have to yourself be able to say, I'm feeling something. What does that mean? And then from that point, you've got, okay, that's what I mean. Now, how do I communicate this to someone else? And I think that's where it comes in. I think that's where language comes in, where math comes in, where art comes in. It's all a way to communicate a feeling. And depending on what that feeling is depends on what medium you will choose to do that. If it's something that's best suited towards language, mathematics, or some art form. And there is, like, people may dismiss it, but art forms like dancing, like painting, like drawing, that is a better way to communicate some feelings that are just too difficult to fit in to the structure of language, the structure of maths.
Correct. I mean, anyone watching a movie or whatever, a good portion of that movie is visual communication and just even the audio, the sound effects, the communication that gets presented through audio that isn't actually verbal communication. So, having an orchestra sort of pick the beat up and make it a little bit of a thriller, and then other times making it very emotionally sad or something like that. Just understanding those little audio cues, that audio signals that we use in order for people to change their emotion. It's all written communication. I think from my point of view as well is it's like I'm a big believer of you learn things as you need them. So, and the reason I say that is because that's when you set up to best learn. There's no point, like, you're not really set up to learn when you don't actually need something. You're sort of like, oh, okay, that's great knowledge. And then a year later you go, oh, what was it again? I need it now. So I think like learning as you need it and making it a little bit more holistic. So I can imagine like learning those traditional subjects, maybe the person's interested in sport, and so they're trying to get, maybe they're trying to accurately throw. I think we've talked through this example before, but they're trying to accurately throw at a target, and so understanding, the motor skills to take that on, but also understanding the physics that's actually occurring so that when you do the motor physics, you can actually take that into account as you throw the ball. So you can imagine you're doing, the sport of actually trying to achieve that task physically. You're walking through some physics and some mathematics, and then possibly a report to communicate to others how you actually achieve that. So, if I threw the ball and hit the target every time, how did I go around achieving that? What is it that I take into account in order to make that occur? And so learning how to write a report about something you're interested about and how you derive to your solution or whatever just takes all those subjects in, all the learnings into account. You're learning to write, you're learning to calculate, you're learning to understand the physical world around you and things like that. So, and I think that as you learn that way, I feel that you understand things a lot more holistically rather than breaking them down into the individual parts and then figuring later in life how you actually use those things together.
Yeah, it's a great point that there is so much more knowledge that we don't get out of something like sport, get out of cooking, that we just take for granted. Like we focus on a specific thing. This is how you follow a recipe, for example. And it's like, well, there's a lot more to it there. There's like ratios in there. There's, what goes together. There's chemistry in there. Did you even take that into account? Did you try and teach that? Did you try and show that? There's like communication. Oh, okay, I want this to be sweet. I want this to be savory. Why? Like throwing the ball's an interesting one as well, like any type of sport, because you have the physics there. And then if you understand a little bit about the physics, you can also use that to problem solve. Okay, I missed the target. It went too far. Maybe I should loosen up on the power, like, and how does that translate to movements and motor skills? Like there's a lot that can be learned from very small like actions that we just normally take for granted. We focus in on one aspect of it and say, okay, this is what you're learning from it. It's like you are learning that, but you're also learning a whole breadth of other stuff that, all you have to do is focus on it and then you'll unlock it.
Yeah, you're right. Cooking is another one. Growing something is another one. You think about like when I grow a plant in the backyard, I've got to take the whole ecosystem into account. What's the soil? Are the bugs going to eat my fruit? Or there's so many things. Is it being watered enough? Is the sunlight conditions right? There's so much packed into just, it seems like a simple task, but there's a lot of learnings you can get from that. And I think that was the one thing I found that I struggled at school. It's like I'm learning these things and I'm like, well, why? I remember learning calculus in later in high school, and it's like, I don't need this. What's this for? I didn't really understand why it practically applied, but now I use it every day. I mean, not a lot of professions wouldn't use it. I have to use the principles or understandings from that in order to do my work. But I think once you see how it's applied and why you're doing it, I think it cements more in your mind. You definitely get a much greater imprint on your mind or memory than you would by just learning it in its individual self and not really understanding how that connects to other things. That's what I found a lot with mathematics. I didn't really understand in high school. Yeah, okay, I could calculate. Like for me, it was more about money, and then I didn't really see anything tangible after too much. Measuring things and building things, but I didn't see much tangible after that. So I was really good up to that point, I feel. But then when it become, algebra was good because I realized, oh yeah, I can solve things from a general point of view when I'm building something. But after that point, it started to become very abstract, and I didn't really understand how to apply it. And I think that wasn't necessarily a fault of my own. It was a fault of the teaching. It was like, learn these rules, learn these principles, regurgitate to me, calculus. Great, I know calculus, but what's it going to do for me?
Yeah, I find similarly, start with the practical application. That's when I learn best. It's like, okay, how am I applying this? What is it that I'm trying to do? And then teach me the fundamentals, the foundation, what's actually going on. Yeah, that's a lot of mathematical principles that I still have no idea how you would actually apply them that I learned. But ones that I learned that I actually use, like for example, matrices and how to do transformation between coordinate spaces, all that kind of stuff. You don't understand necessarily what it's useful for when you see it in mathematical form. But if you start building a video game, if you start building a motion simulator, you can see the practical application of it. And then you realize, oh, hang on, there's a lot of utility in these mathematical equations. Now I know where I can apply them. Then I'm more motivated, again, going back to motivation, to actually learn them and how to use them.
Yeah, and I think a really good teaching method for some of those things is to get someone to actually try and solve the solution without giving them an answer first. So, and I think there's a lot of value in doing that, because then they realize they need some level of knowledge that they don't actually have. So if I said to you, all right, let's say you had the knowledge to be able to, program that motion simulator, but you didn't have the knowledge of how you do spatial calculations. I could say to you, okay, you know how to control the motors. You got the controller, solve it. You should be able to move the platform, and watch them scratch their head for 2 weeks. And so I think that it's a painful process, but it's a process which I think you get the best learning outcome, because you've realized at that point in time, oh, there's some greater level of knowledge that I actually don't have that's going to get me here. I don't have the knowledge to do that. And I think once you realize that, like I said, now you see the need in order to learn that knowledge. So that goes back to teaching, so learning the knowledge as you need it, sort of kind of thing. And so, oh, okay, I do need this knowledge. I do want this motion platform to move, so I need this knowledge now. Okay, I'm really going to focus on it because I know that I need it to come to a solution.
I'd love to talk to a neuroscientist about this, because even when talking about it, having that motivation gives you the focus on what you're doing. You're also going to be alert and aware, which focus and alertness, I think, are the two ingredients necessary to retain information. So yeah, if you're just learning something but you have no interest in it, it's unlikely you're going to be focused on it. So it's unlikely you're actually going to retain it. Whereas if you're confronted with a problem where you're motivated to solve this problem, you're inherently focusing on something. And so when you put your focus on it, you're going to learn it better. So I wonder if you could structure, and I wonder if that's why, I remember when when I was at the end of university, they started moving to more, practical outcomes, more it's less of an exam. It's more you build something, like you build a robot throughout the course. And they found that, students were more engaged. They were learning a lot better. I wonder if that's part of it, because they had that motivation, that focus on it. So now they were actually retaining the information they were learning in class about the underlying principles of how to build something like that.
Yeah, I completely agree. So you sort of seeing the shift from doing tests, which is great, to project-based outcomes. I think I forget what they call them, but it's basically changing a test into putting the evaluation weighting away from a test and putting it onto project-based outcomes. And I agree that I think that education system didn't do that in the past because it's harder to actually evaluate. So, you're building a drone and this person's building, I don't know, a solar panel or something like that. So you have very different projects, and I guess being able to evaluate that's a bit harder because it's very subjective. You're not doing the same thing. I don't have a list of things that I can tick you off on and all the rest of it. But I think while the evaluation is more difficult, the learning outcome is much greater. And like you said, people, you think about, I work in engineering, so I get to see engineering students. You watch how motivated they are when they see something cool, and it's like, okay, now I've got their attention. Now I just need to walk them through that process. And walking through that process is not giving them all the information. It's kind of like guiding them down a path and then supporting them when they're actually needed to support. So I have to find, I don't do any lecturing and all the rest of it, but I have younger people sort of help build things at my work with me. And so learning, where they're at and just giving them a task which they don't quite have the knowledge for, and then seeing how they go about it, get them to do that first attempt first. And they'll do one or two things. They'll try something and it'll fail, or they'll come back and ask a very specific question. And so at that point, okay, yeah, you're ready to sort of go this extra level, this next level. And then they're comfortable at that stage for a while. So it's sort of like going in this level, learning that knowledge, and then practice applying it. And then it's like, okay, and then give them another problem which they can't solve with that, what they've learnt, and then pushing them a little bit further and further. So it's it's that controlled sort of way of getting them to discover the information, I guess.
Yeah, getting them engaged and wanting to actually learn instead of trying to force something on them. I see that as the main role of a in-person teacher, is that they're just there when they get stuck, when the student gets stuck. It's like, okay, I'll give you the next hint to move on, but it's actually up to the student to prompt the teacher rather than the teacher to prompt the student.
Yeah, so I did do a few tutorials. I've never really been in big lecturing, and that's kind of how I structured, it was about programming. And that's kind of how I structured it to them. I give them a problem and I say, all right, well, how are you going to solve it? Like, you've got the internet there, you've got the references there. How am I going to solve it? So, allowing them to basically go and figure their own way of being able to do that. And then at some point in time, each of them are going to ask individual different things. And I think that helps me learn how they're going to approach things, and I can guide them in a response that suits them, I guess. So you learn, as a teacher, you actually learn a lot about the student when you watch them do that rather than give them all the information. So if I teach you something and I give you all the information, I'm seeing you as the same as the next person. So I'm just basically saying, all right, I'm going to standardize the way in which I give you all the information. I've given it to you now. Now you all know it. And the reality is that's not the case. So it's better off to probably allow people to learn at their own paces and learn in different ways. So like they'll get stuck on something. Okay, well, tell me how you went through that. Oh, I did this and that. Okay. Well, did you think about this? Oh, no, actually. Yeah. Okay. So how are you going to find that information? Okay. So go look it up online. And so it's walking them through the ability to learn for themselves. That's kind of what it is.
Yeah. And there's something about giving them all the information up front. It kind of overloads them. I like your approach of, okay, when they get to a certain point, I'll give you that little bit of information that'll get you moving, that'll get you going. But if you give them everything up front, then it's up to them to pass out, oh, okay, I don't need this information right now. I need to find what I actually need right now. And you just lose motivation. Like, regardless of how motivated you are to do that, it's still a higher effort cost and more energy you have to put into it. So you're less likely to see them get as far. Before we finish up, I want to talk about a few more things that I think we should teach in school in order to master ourselves, in order to become independent. One of them is emotional regulation / management, I'm calling it. Sometimes we say controlling our emotions, but I think that's wrong. I think we are unable to control our emotions. We're only able to manage them or regulate them. So I think that is a big part of growing up in general, just maturing, becoming a adult in quotes, because again, back to our adult conversation if you want to know more about that. But yeah, having that emotional management. Do you think that's something that everyone should learn throughout schooling.
Yeah, it's critical. I think having emotional management and self-reflecting is really what I do think that really does determine. There's a big step change when you actually are able to achieve that. I think that's what I'd say about it. So those people that can internalize how they're feeling and then be able to understand how they should manage that are in a much better situation than those that aren't even aware of how they're feeling a certain way. And so, yeah. And like you said, you're going to go. I would agree with that. It is management or regulation. You don't have control over certain feelings. I mean, even now, as me as a 40-year-old, there's times that I go, why did I feel that way or whatever? And I don't think it's always important in justifying it. Like it's important to reflect on why you did that because there can be some learnings, but sometimes you just there isn't a learning and that's okay. So it's just all right, well, I'm in this space. How do I best manage it? And then getting yourself out of that space. So, and I do think you can teach that early with kids. I mean, I don't know, a child psychologist is probably going to be much better in explaining these things. But from my point of view, like kids are actually going through the process of realizing emotions, particularly as they start going to primary school. So I think having a heavy focus on that early on while they're actually developing those skills is probably going to put them in a very good position. It's kind of one of those things that doesn't see, I guess people probably don't see the value in doing it, but it will pay off because you become you'll become more efficient in life once you understand these things. And you become, you're not very efficient when you don't understand how to emotionally regulate. You'll waste a lot of time on things that you can't manage, I guess.
Yeah, people who are less capable of regulating emotions are typically more reactionary, which means they're typically going to make decisions that they may not necessarily agree with or want to make if they had the ability to internalize it, think about it, and then choose how they want to respond. So I think a good path, this is just off the top of my head, I hadn't thought about this beforehand, but for learning about emotions is first off, okay, recognizing them, understanding how that affects us so that we can choose, okay, I'm in a bad mood. If I say something to someone now, it's going to be coming from a bad place. It's likely going to result in something bad. Do I want to allow that to get through or do I want to just say, no, I'll stay quiet. I'll be by myself until I'm out of this mood. And then also understanding ways to get yourself into and out of moods because we do have some control over it through physiological processes. But again, you can't always control it. It's like sometimes you just feel lousy. Sometimes you just feel ecstatic. You can't explain it. It just happens.
Yeah, and I guess just being aware that or comfortable with being able to communicate that to others as well. So like, if you're in a frustrated mood and you want a bit of time by yourself, just letting people know that that's the case. Oh, look, I just need an hour of time. I'm not feeling the best. And I think that helps society as a whole because other people don't then blame themselves for certain things. So, if we don't communicate aspects like that, then other individuals might think they had an impact and it might not necessarily be the case. So, I guess there can be a lot of confusion about our emotions and others. And so communication will help clear that issue up, I guess.
That's a very good point. And another benefit of actually doing this through the recommended schooling is that people will understand that. Like me and you, we understand that because we've been through that. We understand sometimes you're in a bad mood and you just, you're saying things that you don't really mean. But it's not necessarily true that everyone throughout their life will realize that. Some people could get to 70, 80 years old and not realize that. So making sure that everyone, again, goes through school and then we can say, okay, it's likely that they understand this. It'll be easier for us, I think, as human beings to get along because they'll understand when someone says, I'm feeling in a lousy mood. I need to take some time for myself because, they've learnt about it through school.
Yeah, and just understanding it's not emotions are not a persistent state, and that there's a spectrum of emotions. So I think like when you grow up, I think you're always sold like you want to do what makes you happy. And it's kind of like, yeah, but that's not a persistent state. So there's periods in time which you can achieve happiness. But you got to realize that if you're not achieving that happiness, there's nothing wrong with you. It's just that it's not a persistent state without without sadness, you won't get happiness, and vice versa. So, I think understanding the spectrum of emotions and understanding that you're going to go through, you're transient, you're going to go through all those different states at different points in time, allows the individual to realize there's nothing wrong with them. I guess, when you're a kid, someone that might be, there's a lot of people that are a little bit more melancholy than others. And I think that's okay. That's what makes really good art at times. Like good musicians can be deeply, deeply sad about certain things or really feel strongly particular emotions. And that's okay. Like you can express yourself in that frame of mind. We don't all have to be happy to be okay.
Yeah. When you realize that the contrast is what we're actually detecting, then you even start to gain an appreciation for those lower times. It's like, okay, this is a sad time, I'm feeling a bit low now, which just means that I'm going to be happy sometime in the future. You can see it in that way, and in that way you can flip your emotions. So yeah, this too shall pass.
Yeah. And you can take opportunity too. So like some points in time in life, you're going to hit peaks. And so if you don't really understand that it's a sort of like a cyclical or like a sort of fluctuating or transient way, then you're not going to you might not set yourself up to make advantage of the most of that opportunity. But if you realize that, you're like, okay, yeah, I'm feeling really good. This is a point in time that's hard to get to in life. I'm going to take most advantage of it while this is actually occurring, and then it's going to be over. So that realization that at some point it's going to be over allows you to take opportunity at that moment. I guess it's sort of similar. There's an analogy when people, have a life-changing disease and they say, oh, now I know what's really important in life. And it's because they're now forced to actually look and prioritize certain things. So, yeah, just understanding certain points in time in life you can't replicate, and it's to know when they're going to occur and take opportunity of that and really, take advantage.
That's a great point. I mean, yeah, having that awareness that, oh, okay, now I'm feeling really good. I'm going to be present. I'm going to be paying attention to everything now. And then it also gives us that, what would you call it? Maybe confidence, that peace to let that pass. Because, yeah, it's only fleeting. You've taken full advantage of it. And now you can let it pass. Like a lot of the problems we get into is that we get to that peak and then we want to maintain that peak. And that's just unsustainable. It goes against reality. So knowing that you're at the peak, appreciating it, and then knowing that, okay, I can let it go. It's all right. I'll come back to another peak. It may not be as high. It may not be as long, whatever, but it'll come back.
Yeah. And I think professional athletes, solo sport athletes are really need to be quite good at this, because you think about like a world number one tennis player, how do they continue playing once they now become ranked 3rd or 5th or 10th? How do they still then come back and become number one again? So I think for them, it's that realization that, at that state, I was able to achieve that. At this state, I'm actually not there yet, but that's okay. I'll do these actions in order to try and get back to that state and not allow it to impact me or deflate me or to, just give up, I guess, and go, I'm retiring. I can't get there again, kind of thing.
Yeah. And like you said, that's the importance of understanding that it's transient, that, you're in a certain state for a certain period of time. It'll come back, it'll go. And then, yeah, just making the most of it. One other one before we get going, I really want to highlight is perspective switching. So being able to look at something, an event, and see it from multiple angles. So like see the silver lining, see the bad parts of it, just being able to see that, okay, whatever is in front of me, whatever I'm confronted with, there is all the colors of the rainbow in there. It's wherever I put my focus, however I filter it down, is going to shape like how I go moving forwards. Like, I don't know, what's a good example? You get into a car crash or something, as long as, assuming you're still alive, maybe you break a few bones or something, you can say that, oh, that's lousy. You can look at it very negatively, or you can look at it as, oh, not necessarily thank goodness it wasn't worse, but maybe, you know what, that's given me a renewed contrast of life. Now I know what's important. Now I can see the values and things. I got into that crash because I was rushing to get a cup of coffee or something. Was that really important? Did I really need to do that? Being able to take that step back. So it's really looking at any event, no matter what it is, good or bad, and understanding that contained within that event is positive, negative, everything in between, And it's just being able to switch our perspective and choose what we focus on.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's also highly valuable, not only for yourself, but then to be able to empathize with others. So, like, just because you've got a certain perspective and a certain way that you view the world, you have to understand that other people are not going to view it the same way as you, and they've got to live in this world like you do. And so having empathy and understanding of how they perceive the world is highly valuable. And I guess by changing your ability to change your own perspective helps you then be very empathetic for others and be able to sit yourself in their shoes, So, okay, why is this person feeling this way? Or what, like behaviors, why does this person have a certain behavior they repeat? And what you often find is it's something that they've been taught in the past and they don't actually realize it. It's almost like unconscious. And we all have those little flaws. I was thinking about this, like a really good image would be, just every person in the world, but they've got like a little dent on their head. And because we're all broken in some kind of way. And so just realizing, that's the case is quite valuable.
Even that acknowledgement, first of all, realizing that the way that we see the world is based on the experiences that we've had. And so then understanding that, okay, the way that someone else sees the world is based on the experiences that they had. And that awareness that I may be unable to understand the experiences they've had. So I can't say for certain, like, whether what they're doing is purely good, bad, or whatever. It's just that they've been exposed to something. And so trying to, helps us put ourselves in other people's shoes, but also acknowledge that we can't put ourselves in other people's shoes because we haven't been through what they've experienced. So trying to, give us a different perspective on whatever it is.
Mm. Yeah, different points of view. And I think also like understanding that your emotions aren't transient allows you to understand that other people's aren't. So, you can, I guess, at some points in time, you're going to meet someone that doesn't like you or might just have certain flaws in their own sort of emotional regulation, and understanding that, because every time you see them, they might be annoyed or frustrated, doesn't mean that that's who they are persistently. So, that person might be annoyed or frustrated when they're at school or when they're at work, but then they go home and they're a different person. So realizing that, we're all transient allows you to then understand that other people aren't stuck in an aggressive state or an upsetting state or I don't know, whatever state that can be annoying for others, realizing, they're not. And so that then allows you to go, what are the conditions that actually set them up into different states and how do I actually have an impact on that? And I think all this knowledge actually allows us to socialize at a much better level.
I definitely agree with that. All right. Is there anything else? Obviously, there's a lot more things we could bring up in terms of, okay, this would be good to learn in order to master ourselves. But I'm sure over time, through different podcasts, through different topics that we do, we'll cover a majority of them. Is there anything else for this specific topic of schooling that you wanted to bring up?
No, I don't think so. I think we've covered the main portion of it. And then, if we ever felt the need, we could practically go through some of those subjects in the curriculum at some point in time in the future. But I think we've set the foundation of why maybe school could, the way in which we run school, the system of schools could be updated and what that update could look like. I think we've sort of conveyed that.
Yeah, just to remind ourselves, I think the main part was the access to knowledge has completely changed from when school would have been implemented to now. So we have a lot more leeway in what we could do in school. And then once again, and I've said it a few times, but I think it is really important to recognize that we are at the center of everything we do. We are the foundation for everything we do. So if we build that foundation, if we make ourselves stronger, better, more efficient, whatever, however you want to phrase it, that will improve everything in life, not just, one specific thing.
Yeah, and the last thing I would say is not only has our access to information has changed, the understanding of our knowledge has also changed. And so the school system probably needs to figure out a better way to try and adapt that. So as, like I said, I think mental illness and understanding our mindsets and all the rest of it has changed significantly. Now, that might be progressing through to schools. I don't go to school, so it's a bit hard to tell. But I think the curriculum hasn't sort of changed to look at that and adopt a much different approach.
Yeah, let's factor in our improved understanding about like you said, mental illness, or just how we learn in general, how we best learn and retain knowledge. All right, then. My supplemental song suggestion for this week is Tech9's Public School featuring Krizz Kaliko. And my quote for today is going to be, "Imagination is more important than knowledge, for knowledge is limited to all we know and understand, while imagination embraces the entire world and all there ever will be to know and understand." That's by Albert Einstein. You may know him. You may have heard of him. Thanks for joining us for this discussion. We look forward to hearing your thoughts on this topic. And as always, be well.